I couldn't imagine not doing it. I love it. I love kids, right? I think we all do, right? That's why we're here. That's why we answered the call and said, here I am, Lord, send me. And so what we want to do is really invest in how do we support our kids, right? Kids come from all backgrounds and walks of life. Our doors are open to the community. That is the point of fellowship and sharing of the gospel. It is to reach the world, right? It is to provide fellowship and open up the word of the Lord to God and to the kids and to the families and to usher them in to be part of our congregation and our fellowship and the community of the gospel. And so how we do that, though, can sometimes be really daunting and tricky and downright scary. We want to do right by kids. We want to do the things that God is calling us to do. And sometimes the question is how, right? Because we have probably all sat in a moment where we said, okay, I am living with the understanding that God equips the called. He doesn't necessarily only call the equipped. And sometimes we just don't feel equipped. I know I've been in that moment professionally and within church spaces with students. And so my goal is to have you guys walk out of here today and feel a little bit more equipped to be able to answer that call. So we're going to talk about how we steward inclusion within children's ministry. We have some objectives. Step out of the way here. And first and foremost, I do want to give you just a really brief overview of what neurodevelopmental disorders are. And we're going to cover just a couple of the really common ones and some of the symptomology so that you're more familiar with what you might see from a student if they are neurodivergent. Right? Then we're going to talk about behavior. That's everybody's favorite, right? It's usually the reason I get the call. Classroom management, behavior, we want to reach kids, but we're just not sure how to do that when it becomes tough. Right? And then we're going to talk about strategies and supports. How do we handle it? How do we handle it and manage it in the classroom? And then more importantly, how do we do that in a way that fosters faith and points them back to God? Right, and then we're going to talk about some very specific applications that your team here has decided to implement at Advent. All right, so here's some common childhood disabilities. They fall into what the DSM, or Diagnostic Statistic Manual, big word, you'll never have to see it, I promise, called neurodevelopmental disorders. Okay, neurodevelopmental disorders, per the NCBI down here, are defined as multifaceted conditions characterized by impairments in cognition, communication, behavior, and or motor skills that results from abnormal brain development. This is something that they're born with. It is pervasive, it is lifelong. You don't outgrow it, although it can be treated, right? And it affects the way in which their brain talks to the rest of their body and the way they're going to socially behave and engage with you. Sometimes that's really mild, in ways that you might not even realize are part of or a result of a neurodevelopmental disorder. They may look typical, but in fact be neurodivergent. And in other cases, it might be very obvious that a student has a disability or is a neurodivergent individual. All 7 of these are considered to be neurodivergent neurodevelopmental disabilities or disorders. The 3 that I've highlighted here are the ones we're going to talk about today because they're the most common, not only that we see in classrooms because of the prevalency rates within children, they're also the 3 statistically that are the most common for the District of Columbia. So I'm going to share some rates with you as we go through that so that you can get some very specific information about what the students, the kids that walk through your door right here in DC might be struggling with. Autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, intellectual disabilities, schizophrenia. Most people don't know that's actually a neurodevelopmental disorder. We think of that from a mental health perspective, and it certainly is. But it is classified as a neurodevelopmental disorder. It means that their brain is rewired differently from birth. Motor and tic disorders, so things like Tourette's. Specific learning disorders, things like dyslexia, dyscalculia, right? And then emotional disabilities and conduct disorders. So let's just very briefly talk about autism. Autism, or ASD, is classified as a communication type of a neurodevelopmental disorder. How many of you have ever traveled to a foreign country? And how many of you didn't speak the language when you went? Was it easy to get around? Find signs, go to the bathroom, order off of a menu? Sometimes not so much, right? You go, you say something, the waiter's looking at you like, I I don't serve that, right? This is what it can be like for a student with autism, even if they communicate in a way that seems to us to be really well, right? Because there's both expressive delays, meaning how we communicate what you hear, and receptive delays, meaning what's going on in their brain when they're listening to you talk, right? So think about that when you're teaching, right? That all of that language that we're using, all those words that we're trying to use to convey the Word of God in our Bible story and our lesson, it might take them a little longer to be able to process and understand that, because autism is a communication disorder. It has 3 key characteristics. It is defined by poorly developed social skills, so you may see kiddos that get too close, just start feeling a little uncomfortable. We need to protect our little bubble, right? These might be the kiddos that climb into your lap where you start thinking about your PCC classes, right? You're protecting God's children, making sure that we're not in our laps. We do high fives, not hugs or side hugs, not from the front, right? But then they're just like, they just really want to sit with you while you're reading that Bible lesson, right? It also may be kids that are really far away from you. Those kids that are hanging out on the outskirts of the classroom, won't make eye contact, almost look like they're completely ignoring you, and you're like, I don't understand why they just won't come sit down and listen, right? They might not be able to, right? Their brain might be wired differently. So the reason I bring this up is because before we assume bad behavior, let's presume we need to support them because something might be going on that we're not quite aware of yet, right? The second piece that happens with autism is that there's a difficulty with that expressive and receptive communication. Sometimes that looks like not necessarily being able to understand what you were saying, and you start feeling like you've repeated this direction 6 times. What is going on? Now, I feel like that with my 13-year-old at home, and he does not have autism, so this certainly is still something that can happen with children that are neurotypical. But with a child that is neurodivergent, it might be more prominent. And then thirdly, there is often a presence of restricted or repetitive patterns of behavior. You've probably heard the word stimming socially out in the world, right? And that's true, that can happen, right? But we also all engage in certain types of restrictive and repetitive patterns of behavior, even as neurotypical individuals. Any of you get really annoyed because your coworker just keeps clicking that pen, right? Oh, it's really annoying, right? Sometimes we do that too, right? For a child with autism, though, that might look a little more overt, right? You might see flapping. This also might not be motor-based. It might be vocal. This might be the kid that just cannot stop telling you about how much they love Thomas the Train, and it's been 20 minutes and you're trying to get back to Paul in the Bible, but we just really got to cover Thomas for the 900th time, right? Because that's how their brain works. It's not that they're trying to be disruptive, it's that they're trying to develop relationship with you, and their ability to develop relationship might look different than what we typically think of as how we build relationship with a kid or with one another. So these are all of the things that encompass autism. So do any of these situations sound familiar to you? There's just a kid that really loves a specific toy or a TV show, and they're just really not going to stop talking about it. They're just, we're only doing Thomas the Train or SpongeBob or whatever it might be, and it's been like 45 minutes and you're all the way through Sunday school and you're like, I know so much about superheroes that I did not know before we started, right? Or maybe a kiddo that has an insistence on game rules. You ever played a game at church that they play at home or at school, and they're like, that's not how it's played, right? And you're like, okay, well, the rules here are different, and everybody else is okay with the different rules, but this one child is like, that is not how this game is played. That very well might be a symptom of something like autism, right? Individuals that are neurodivergent, often their brains are wired in a way where consistency makes things less anxious. And so when all of a sudden rules start changing to games, that game that you thought was going to be oh so fun starts turning into a really anxiety-inducing moment for a kiddo. Maybe they just get a little too close. They want to cuddle, they want to be in your lap, the high fives aren't cutting it, the fist bumps aren't cutting it, we just really want to be right with that person that we love. Maybe there's extreme distress at anything unexpected, right? We had Vacation Bible School not too long ago, and we had to change the location of one of our rotations one day for games for our rec time because it was pouring rain outside and we could not go outside. And I did have a couple of students who just could not handle that we were going to be in a different location because it was day 4, and for 3 days prior to that, we'd been going right here at this time because routines are incredibly effective. That's actually an evidence-based strategy that we talk about to support a kiddo with autism. And so you may see distress when routines change. Now that doesn't mean that we don't have to change them. They do have to be changed sometimes, but it gives you some context as to what might be going on. Maybe it's the kid that seemingly ignores you when you try to talk to them. Won't make eye contact, won't talk to you back, won't look at you, is walking away from you maybe. Right? Or maybe it's the kiddo that has a fascination with unusual objects. In my professional life, I have a student, you're not supposed to have favorites, but you do. He's one of mine, right? His absolute most favorite thing in the entirety of the whole wide world is Oscar the Grouch's trash can. And he wants to get in it, right? He asked for one of those silver trash cans to get in. That's what he works to earn in the classroom. And that seems kind of odd. You're like, I don't think I should let you earn getting in a trash can. It seems like parents are gonna be like, oh, okay, Miss Claire's lost it, right? But that's what he likes, right? How many of you like reality TV? Some people might find that odd, right? We all like things. We all have preferences. It just might be that their preferences don't match ours. But then again, yours and mine might not match either. 1 in 36 children are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, and boys are 4 times more likely than girls to have a diagnosis. All right, let's talk about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADD, ADHD. Most people have heard this. It is defined as a persistent pattern of inattention and or hyperactivity or impulsivity that interferes with functioning and development, but there are actually 2 types. This used to be 2 different disability categories. You used to get 2 different diagnoses, now it's 1, and you just get one of the subtypes. The first is the inattentive type, right? So these are kiddos that might lack attention to details or make careless mistakes. They might have really poor sustained attention, right? You're like, man, we just cannot stay on this Bible story. They're not in word and circle time, and we just cannot look at this verse, right? Or they have difficulty following directions, right? They get extracted. So how do you guys use props as part of, right? You dress up sometimes, right? We had, our congregation has a former bishop from Doma, and so he came in dressed up as one of the disciples one day, and for 25 minutes the students were just completely obsessed with the costume, right? Because we have some students that get really distracted by the extraneous stimuli. And then there's the hyperactivity type, right? This is your Energizer bunny that just cannot sit down, right? Or if they're sitting down, they're also like, while sitting, or like all of a sudden they're talking to their peer, and then they've got stuff in their hands, and they're holding the Bible, but they're like rocking with it, and you're like, we have to be gentle with the Bible. That's the Word of God. We're not going to tear it, right? They're on the go, right? It is really common. This is actually one of the most common neurodevelopmental disorders that you could have in childhood, and it is often not diagnosed until after 5th grade, which means that the students that you're going to see very well might not have an answer as to why they're behaving this way yet. Prevalence of children is that about 5% of children and 2.5% of adults have this, and that is an underestimate because oftentimes people don't go to the doctor and ever get it diagnosed. They know they have it, they'll say they have it, but it's not documented in the data. Conduct disorders, there are 3 types: oppositional defiance disorder, intermittent explosive disorder, and then a full-blown conduct disorder, which is the most severe. Some current symptoms of these are things like they may get easily annoyed or intentionally annoy others, right? They may lose their temper or argue with adults, blame others for their mistakes, engage in verbal or physical aggression. They may engage in property destruction, bully, threaten, or intimidate others, engage in theft or deceitfulness. And if they engage in any of these ones in red, that's a pretty significant indicator that we might actually be looking at a conduct disorder. These are those students where we identify immediately something's going on. This behavior is outside of what would be neurodevelopmentally typical for a student, and there's a problem, but we don't know how to address it, and we want to make sure that they're supported because this feels really heavy. So let's talk about behavior. It's everybody's favorite. Clinically, as a behavior analyst, we define behavior by what we call the dead man's test. And what that means is that if a dead man can do it, then it's not behavior, and anything a dead man can't do is. Why do I bring this up? Because very, very often people go, when I say, what's behavior? What comes to your mind? You can shout it out. Actions, right? What kind? You can name some behaviors. Right, talking. Thank you. I'm so glad that we've got this, right? Because sometimes what happens, I say this, and people will just go hitting, slapping, pinching, talking out when they're not supposed to, and they name all the bad things, right? But behavior is anything we do. I'm engaging in multiple behaviors right now. I'm flailing my arms, I'm talking, I'm walking around, I'm making eye contact with some of you, I'm looking at the screen, right? A dead man can't do those things. So it's behavior, and it's really important that we take the mindset of understanding that all of those things are behavior, because if the only thing we do is focus on the bad behavior, on the stuff we want to manage or get rid of or lessen that's inappropriate or interfering and challenging, then we're also not teaching all of the really, really important critical skills that they're going to need, right? Yes. Social skills matter, and they matter outside of just your public or private school classroom, right? They matter at church because a spiritual version of social skills is fellowship, right? We've heard your team talk about how part of their central mission with children's ministry is to develop relationships with children so that they develop relationships with each other, and most importantly, relationships with God. If we don't focus on the behavior that helps them do that, then we're limiting them, right? So we want to support them in that. So what makes a behavior good or bad? And how do we know which is which? And is there ever a time in which bad behavior is actually a good behavior? So I'm going to give you an example. If I punched Heather in the face right now, is that good or bad behavior? That's bad behavior, right? If Heather tries to abduct me in the parking lot and I punch her in the face, is that good or bad behavior? Oh, it's self-defense. We got a little bit of like a mix. We're like, well, you used to punch people, but like, yeah. Right? Because context matters. Environment matters, and that's the underpinning of behavior analysis. That's the foundation of behavioral science. That in order to change the behavior, we have to understand the context. We have to know the environment. We have to know why it's happening and what the history around it is and what skills are missing and still need to be taught so that we can define that behavior. Because the other part of that is that we have to really make sure we're being specific. If I am trying to support Heather and Heather's engaging in physical aggressive behavior, and I say to Stevie, all right, Stevie, you and I are going to work to support her. She engages in a lot of physical aggression, and every time she gets physically aggressive, I want you to use X, Y, and Z strategy. But I think of physical aggression, and I'm including punching, hitting, kicking, spitting, biting, smacking, slapping, punching, right? But Stevie only includes 4 of those things and doesn't include spitting. That means that that strategy isn't going to get used when she spits with Stevie. She's only going to use it with me. And so we have to provide operational definitions clinically for behavior so that we're all on the same page about what it means, right? What is physical aggression for this particular kid, right? And that's really important for you guys to have that mindset, although being still, confident in pertaining to safety and not oversharing and privacy, right? That when you're talking with your team, that there's a level of protection and understanding of you're trying to foster and support students. So it is okay when you're talking to say, I think this might be verbal aggression or physical aggression, and how can I support a kid in doing that? Because bottom line, all behavior is communicative intent, right? All behavior is we're trying to get our wants and our needs met because we might not be speaking the same language, and we're trying to figure out what we need to do to order off of that menu when you don't speak Italian, right? And when you can't, the need for the food doesn't go away, right? You might start like pointing at things on the menu, right? Sometimes that behavior looks very odd, or even challenging, or even bad, because you're trying to meet your want or your need. And kids do it, and adults do it, and we all do it regardless of disability status. This isn't something that only pertains to a neurodivergent student. It just might be more significant or obvious in situations if you have a student that is neurodivergent. So applied behavior analysis, or ABA, is the application of behavioral science to support the acquisition and reinforcement of adaptive skills and the reduction of unsafe, challenging behavior within an individual's repertoire. Lots of big words. What does that mean? Well, the name of the game is environmental modification, right? I want to know context. I want to know why the behavior is happening. I want to know what the specific behavior is so that I can start figuring out what they're trying to tell me. What's the communication? Oh, you're scared. Oh, you want mom. Oh, you're still hungry. You need the bathroom. Oh, you've missed your friend, and so you're talking to her for the 25 minutes through the Bible lesson because you just haven't met that need yet, right? It's all about what we call function, the why. And there are 4 functions of behavior. Okay, you can remember them by everybody eats, and this is on your handout. Escape. People engage in behavior to escape or avoid situations that they don't like. How many of you have ever hit decline on your phone when you thought it was spam? Yes, the hitting of the button, a dead man can't do that, that's behavior. The declining behavior is a function of escape. It gets you out of a phone call you don't want to have, right? Whether that's spam or your mother-in-law, who knows, right? Second function is attention, right? We engage in behavior for attention. I'm doing it right now. If all of you stop paying attention to me and you start talking amongst yourselves, the likelihood that I continue the training and speaking behavior probably goes away very quickly, right? In fact, I may start engaging in some other behavior, see if I can get it back, right? Like tap dancing up here, see like who's gonna pay attention and watch me now, right? We all do that, right? You're going to be doing it in the Sunday school classroom, right? You're teaching. The primary function there is that you want their attention in hopes that that attention gets used by God to translate the gospel, provide fellowship, create a foundation of faith. Third function of behavior is tangible, right? Items, food, stickers, toys, right? How many of you have kids that are willing to do just about anything to get the iPad? Yeah, behavior that's tangible. How many of you work? Can I have a raise of hands? Anybody? Yeah, okay. So all of you with your hands up, you engage in behavior somewhere between part-time and full-time hours every single week for a tangible reinforcer. And that would be your paycheck. Yes. If your paycheck stops coming in, you're probably not going to work. That working behavior starts to go down, right? In fact, you might do more work if your boss says they're going to pay you more. It goes up. Last function of behavior is sensory. Sometimes we call this automatic. That doesn't require anybody else, right? That's something going on within our own body, right? If you have an itch, what do? You scratch it, right? I don't have to tell you to do it. I don't have to offer you the iPad to get you to do it. The scratching behavior is reinforced. It is a function of sensory within your own body. And sometimes that's to get more sensory input, and sometimes it's to get less. And we all do this. Every single one of us engage in behavior for all 4 of these functions. Sometimes we do a behavior for more than one at the same time. And this is really important when we start thinking about classroom management, because when we start going, I don't understand why Johnny just keeps talking to his peer and he won't listen, and I'm trying to read this Bible story about Jesus walking on water, and he will just not listen to me, and it's because Johnny's behavior is a function of his peer's attention. The reinforcement's coming from somebody else, and I need to figure out how do I provide that level of attention with the Bible story so that he's willing to pay attention to me. So I want to walk you through just a little bit of a scenario so that you can get your mind wrapped around how this might work in a classroom, in Sunday school or children's church, right? Let's say that Jenny is the last child to arrive on Sunday morning. She's sitting alone at the second table. She's coloring her picture during the welcoming activity, and Miss Tara, that's our children's minister at Elsie, she just loves that she makes appearances here, calls out to everyone, "Good morning, everyone. It's time to start Sunday school. Let's come over here in the middle and we're going to sing our praise song." As her peers begin to move, Jenny stays in her seat at the table and continues to color. Miss Claire, the teacher's assistant, goes over and says to Jenny, "Jenny, it's time to clean up. We got to clean up coloring and go listen to the song." And Jenny refuses. She starts clinging to her crayons and coloring her page, and Miss Claire starts to gather the other crayons and the extra coloring pages and clean up, and once again says to Jenny, "Come on, Jenny, coloring is over. It's time to come start and sing. You can stand next to me." Jenny reluctantly puts down her crayons and walks with Miss Claire to go and sing the song, right? So when we look for function as a behavior analyst, we do that through something called the ABCs, right? A is antecedent. It's all the things that happen right before a behavior happens. B is the behavior. That one's probably fairly obvious. And C are consequences. Now here's the thing about consequences. People think that consequences are like these good or bad things that we hand out, right? Like, here's a sticker, I've praised you, right? Except that there was a consequence that's happening that I didn't hand her, right? She still had the coloring page. The consequence is that she's not been forced to move over to the singing and worship time. The coloring page is still available to her, and so that's reinforcing her staying at the table and coloring. right? So now, as I start to look through this, I can start to see a pattern. A direction is giving, she's still coloring, I re-give a direction, she's still coloring, I re-give a direction, she's still coloring, until I offer attention. And then she says, okay, I'll stand next to you, right? So what I'm seeing here is that for the first half of this, the function of that behavior of not transitioning, of staying at the table, is the coloring sheet. That's really powerful. It's a tangible function. We want that coloring sheet back, but that attention and relationship with me, not just coming and standing with her peers, getting to stand next to Miss Claire while she sings, was powerful enough to have that motivating factor to move, to transition to our next activity. These are the things we look for in our children's church and our Sunday school classrooms, because powerful attention is really, really impactful, right? We're trying to teach fellowship in action. So our function, the why, the communication, is the consequence that impacts the likelihood of that behavior happening again, right? So if we change the consequences, I can change the behavior. If 3 refusals into that coloring sheet earlier, I had removed the coloring sheet and said, hey, first we gotta go to worship. You can stand right next to me and you can get this coloring sheet back at the end. The coloring sheet's no longer available. I've changed the consequence. The consequence that's available now is my attention, and we've moved on, rather than just letting it sit there. If she wanted attention, I could have said that first, right? Okay, first we have to come stand with the group, and then you can sit with Miss Claire during the Bible lesson. Maybe she can't stand with me because I'm actually like leading the worship. It's not just a video, right? But I can provide that attention and motivate her by saying, my attention's still available. You don't have to refuse and engage in challenging behavior to get my attention. We can do this together. Quick terminology check. Antecedents are anything that occurs before behavior happens. Consequences are whatever happens right after behavior happens, whether we intend for it or not. Behavior is anything a person does, and function is why it happens. Now we're briefly going to cover reinforcement, punishment, positive, and negative. Stick with me, I promise this is not confusing as it looks. Positive reinforcement is that I added something to the environment and a behavior increased as a result, right? You came to work, I gave you your paycheck, your work behavior went up, right? Student comes to the worship time, I give a sticker, behavior goes up. Negative reinforcement is that behavior still goes up, but as I remove something, right? My 13-year-old got all A's on his report card, he doesn't have to do the dishes anymore, he's excited that he does not have to do the dishes. He keeps studying to get good grades. Punishment sounds like a dirty word. We all think, well, we don't punish in children's ministry, right? But here's the thing, punishment clinically is just when we're trying to reduce behavior. And that is a goal. There are some behaviors that have to be reduced that aren't appropriate in a Sunday school classroom, right? Positive punishment, that's probably the one you're not gonna do, right? That's when things are added to the environment most commonly that we know of. That's when people like spanking, right? We're never going to do that. That would be terrible, right? Something was added as a result. They're not going to engage in that behavior anymore. Negative punishment, however, is when we say things like, okay, coloring sheet's got to be mine until we come to circle time, right? I've removed the fun thing. As a result, the refusal behavior goes down. Bottom line, though, if a child's not learning the way we teach, we gotta change the way we teach. It's interaction, right? It's about how we are interacting and developing relationship with students and teaching them in our interactions what's acceptable in certain contexts and what's not. And still showing grace and forgiveness and mercy in the way that our Lord and Savior has called us to do. So let's talk about how we're gonna do that. Let's talk about how we're gonna do it here at Advent. Okay, the first thing that you're gonna notice in and amongst your new curriculum and with your team is that your team has been very hard at work looking through curriculum and trying to plug in specific routines that are going to happen within your Sunday school and children's church classrooms. And you'll even see that on the handout that they gave you with the protocol, where it has that schedule, right? It shows sort of at this time this is going to happen, and this time it's going to happen. They plugged in consistency by having certain teachers work more weeks back to back so that you know the kids and they know you, because routines are incredibly important. Routines make us comfortable, right? We tend to go back to the same chair or same desk we sat in before, right? We go to the same people that we know. right? Most of us probably get up in the morning and make our coffee and eat our breakfast and do all of those things in a very similar order. And our kids do that too, and when we can apply that to our curriculum and our classroom, they're more likely to be engaged with the content then in the curriculum, because they don't have to be anxious or worry about what else is happening, because they already know, it's been embedded. That pairs with this visual schedule, and they've got in your classrooms these nice portable visual schedules. And what will happen is that these little cards will end up having things that match your curriculum schedule, right? Welcome activity, worship video, circle time, Bible lesson, bathroom break, right? So that there's a visual, so that when you get those kids that are like, when can I go to the bathroom? First we have to do Bible, and then we can go to the bathroom, right? First we have worship video, then we'll do snack, right? There's a reference. And often once these get embedded frequently enough, those types of questions start going down and getting curved. You start having the calling out, interrupting, challenging behavior, because they don't need to ask you anymore. It's just right here. This is also really helpful for you, right? Because there's a check. New curriculum, you're like, what am I teaching this week, right? It's one less thing for you to have to worry about what the schedule looks like. All right, next up is sensory supports. And these will work for students that are neurodivergent and neurotypical. So you don't have to only pull them out if you suspect that a kiddo has autism. We don't need to start asking people, do you have a disability, and otherwise you can't have it. That would not be nice, right? But sometimes we have students that just need to fidget, right? They might be engaging in ADHD-like behaviors, whether they have it or not. I certainly do. And so we have some sensory fidgets, and I'll pass them around so that you can see some of the different types, right, that you can hand out. Okay, now the question that I always get, I'm just gonna start passing so that you guys can see some of these. These, if you're looking, they don't peel off, you just scratch them. They're like textured. Okay, so I'll start that back here and y'all can pass some things around. The way that this works is, let's say that you're sitting at circle time, you're reading the story that's in the Bible lesson for the day, and you're noticing that Susie is just, she's not handling things well. She seems very anxious. Or she's really hyperactive, she's got the wiggles, right? And we just need to regulate in some way, shape, or form, whether that's from an anxious place, whether that's from an excited, overstimulating, look at the costume, Miss Heather came in dressed up like a disciple, right? These are what these are for. You as the teacher or the assistant or the support person can go and hand out something to a child and say, hey, it seems to me like you might need this so that we can stay calm and focus on the Bible lesson, right? Even better if we're noticing it from a I'm scared or I'm nervous kind of a place, to say, hey, do you want to come with me real quick and let's say a 2-minute prayer to center ourselves back on Jesus, and then you can take this fidget with you to sit and listen to the rest of our Bible story? That's okay. Right? They don't have to use them perfectly. I promise you elementary schoolers won't. That's all right. You can redirect. It doesn't mean they have to just go away. You will probably want to set some expectations with your kids when you pull them out. Hey guys, we have some things available that I as the teacher am going to hand out if I see you need them. Not everybody's going to get them all the time, and that's okay. But we have to make sure that we're using them safely. We're not going to hit each other with them. We're not taking them from one another. And when we get that really fun question that everybody is always really worried about of, well, wait a minute, what I do for one, I have to do for the rest of them. What happens when that kiddo thinks that that's not fair, that he doesn't get one? And here's what I want to say as a professional to you. The mindset that everything has to be fair is actually very harmful from a child development standpoint, because it's not true. Life's not fair, right? And what we can do in that moment is point back to God and say, you know what? God made everybody in all different types of ways. And sometimes you have a need, and he's going to help me meet your need in one way. And right now, Johnny has a need, and we're going to be a good friend and fellowship with him and meet his need in a way he needs. And it's really as simple as that, because we're teaching our children what it looks like to minister to one another. Prompting. Giving directions and redirecting when things have gone not so right. It happens, right? The first thing I want to make sure that we cover just briefly, not that you need to memorize this, but I did put it on your handout so that you could take it with you, is that there's this thing called a prompting hierarchy. And basically that means that the way we interact with a kid, there's ways that we can do that with a lot of attention or with a little bit of attention. And sometimes you're gonna have to maneuver in and out of that a little bit, right? Sometimes there are those kids that are engaging in attention in not so great ways, right? They're engaged in all that challenging, tough behavior, and you're like, oh my word, can we please just stop, right? And you get kind of frustrated, rightfully so. You're like, Johnny, we have got to do this Bible lesson. I need you to come back. No, that's not appropriate. That's not our expectation, right? And in your mind, you're going, man, he's just turned this into a game. He loves that I'm coming over talking to him. Like, he just won't quit. Yeah, he wants your attention. And so sometimes we have to remember that bad attention is better than no attention at all. And prompting and directions very well might be a form of attention. And so we want to stay neutral in those moments when we're redirecting, right? We want to make sure that we're prompting back to the thing they need to do. It's time to come for worship, or it's time to come for the Bible lesson, but we're not doing the fun mom look, right? Or the tone of like, Johnny, come here, right? Because we also want to be the hands and feet of Jesus, right? And Jesus, thank the Lord, literally does not talk to me like that every time I stray, which is more often than I'd like to admit, right? And so we want to model that for our kids. How do we redirect in the way that God does, right? There are a whole different types of prompting levels, right? Sometimes we point to things we want them to do, or places that we want them to go. Sometimes we have a visual, like the visual schedule that tells them, right? Sometimes we have to physically, in some cases, move them, right? We don't want to run over by a bus. Oh my goodness, we have to move you out of the way, right? There's a time and place for everything. So just be mindful about what level of prompting we might be using with a student and how that interaction might be impacting that kiddo. If the behavior isn't changing the way you want it to, chances are your prompting isn't doing what you're hoping that it's doing, right? And so sometimes that's a tough pill to swallow, because you're like, well, but I meant it this way and it's not working, and so then we gotta try something else. Maybe it's a sensory fidget. Maybe it's a 2-minute prayer break to center ourselves back on Jesus, right? Task analysis is the idea that when you're giving directions, break them down, right? Not just single step directions, although that's really helpful for your age group, right? And not even just for a child that's neurodivergent, but with increased screen times, we are seeing that developmentally even neurotypical children are not multitasking well, right? They think they are, that they can do homework and watch the screen time. My 13-year-old will tell you he's fantastic at it. His math grades would suggest otherwise, right? Which is why we have this conversation with him, right? But the idea of, if I said to you, go wash your hands, how many directions did I just give you? One. Did I? You have to stand up, you have to walk the door, you have to open it, you have to find the bathroom, which by the way is 3 flights upstairs down in this building. You have to open that door, you have to potentially turn on the lights, turn the water faucet on, put your hands under, get soap, right? Ooh, lots of directions. So think about when you say, it's time to come sit at circle time, we're gonna read the Bible story. Maybe it's just, hey guys, hand me your coloring worksheets. Hey guys, put the crayons away. Hey guys, stand up, push your chairs in. Hey guys, come sit right here on the spot, right? When we go one at a time, it breaks it down so that it's not confusing for a student. It also gives you time to motivate the students that don't want to do it by providing a lot of attention for the small stuff. I love how you put your pink crayons in the bucket for me. That's amazing. Good job, Johnny. And Susie over here, who doesn't want to give up the pink crayons, is like, well, I want her to praise me like that. And now she's putting her pink crayons away too. Choice making, right? We like to have control and choice in things. Students are no different. We can select what the appropriate choices are. I'll give you an example. Would you like to ask questions at the end of this slide or the end of the presentation? Notice that I did not give you an option to stop me while I'm talking, right? My desire is to get you to engage, ask questions, right? Get to know the content, get to know me, let's support one another, right? I've given you 2 acceptable choices to me that you can pick from. You're more likely to make a choice because you get some control, but I still get the behavior that I want, which is you being engaged, and I'm not getting the behavior I don't want, which is to be interrupted and lose my train of thought. We can do the same thing. Hey, it's time to come to the Bible lesson. Would you like to sit next to Miss Heather or next to me? Would you like to sit next to Miss Kirsten or next to me? Right? That gives them some choice, but it's acceptable choices to you. You're still getting the behavior you want while curbing what you don't. And lastly, remember to fill the cup. Bad attention's better than no attention at all. If a student comes in, if a kiddo walks through the door and they just really have an overabundance of stimulation and they need to get self-regulated so that they can focus, we want to be handing out those sensory fidgets then, not waiting for the bad behavior to happen to hand it out. right? We want to notice and build relationships with our children to understand their needs so that we can meet those needs, because when we fill the cup, when we give the attention early, when we hand out the sensory fidgets, when we tell them what's coming and when their bathroom break and snack is coming, they don't have to engage in the challenging behavior to meet that need. They don't have to figure out how to speak Italian to order off of the menu because you've already provided dessert. And lastly today, I want to talk a little bit about trauma. What is it? It is a pervasive emotional response to an event. A traumatic event is defined as any scary, shocking, or dangerous experience that leads to a physical or emotional impact on someone, and it could be any or all of these things. Physical injury, life-threatening illness, divorce, car accidents, natural disasters, acts of violence. There are many, many more, right? But any event that has a long-lasting impact emotionally or physically on an individual can be considered a traumatic event. Somebody hit play on that video, please. Doesn't want to work for my clicker. So I'm going to give you a little snapshot of a teacher in a classroom. I think you just hit, if you click into the little square. Yes.
What does it mean to make the world a better place?
Nice! So those are those big questions we're focusing on. For me, being trauma-informed has so much to do with mindset, accepting that different people come into a school setting with incredibly varied life experiences. Some of those life experiences may be traumatic, and the way in which that plays out in my particular classroom could look a number of ways. And by me having that lens, it makes it less about are they doing the right thing or the wrong thing, and more about where is that behavior coming from, why is that happening.
Adverse childhood experiences like poverty, neglect, exposure to violence can bring about overwhelming stress, which can cause negative effects on the learning brain and on behavior. If children have the experience of adversity, they will have uneven development of these foundational skills like self-regulation and executive function or relationship skills. These are the children who are at risk to fall further and further behind. But the good news is that there is a powerful antidote to stress, and that is the effect of the human relationship and the presence of trust. Schools are an ideal place to produce many different kinds of relationships that are capable of buffering stress. Schools themselves can be healing places.
If you're fearful, if you're anxious, if you're distracted about something that's happened to you, you literally can't learn. Your brain shuts down. So it's essential to give kids social and emotional tools that allow students to recover from the challenges that they have experienced. Take actual classroom time to work on the building blocks of how to perceive your emotions, how to talk about them, how to get along with other people, how to take a moment and become calm when you need to, how to express your needs so that others can meet them.
When we start to understand what it takes to be responsive to the effects of trauma, we need to think about the environment, about individual services, and we need to think about the skills and mindsets of kids that won't develop as they should when they're impacted by trauma.
I do a lot of work around self-awareness and being able to name emotions and then make a choice around those.
When I get mad, I take deep breaths, and that helps me get more calm.
Many of the things that we think about doing for kids who may have experienced trauma are good for everybody. And everyone will encounter some kind of adverse circumstance at some point in their life. And for some children, we're helping them deal with what's already happened in their lives. For others, we're preparing them to deal with the challenges later in their lives.
If you can hear my voice, say, "You are awesome."
wants to replay on me. There we go. Why does trauma matter? Because a lot of people encounter aversive and traumatic events. And in fact, for students that are neurodivergent brains can actually resemble physiologically in their development the brains of individuals impacted by trauma. And so trauma-informed practices like embedding sensory supports, like prompting in a way that fosters positive relationship, matter because it is impactful to every kid that walks through our doors. Much like a school where kids come from all varieties of life, all walks of life, our doors are open to the whole wide world. We encourage that, right? Come. We are here to love you, right? And just like the teacher in this video talks about instilling an understanding of emotions and support, right? We're talking about identity formation. Understanding our emotions when things are tough and what to do when we don't know how to regulate our bodies. And as Christians, we take that a step further because our identity is rooted in an amazing, loving Savior, right? Our identity is rooted in understanding that there is a joyful, loving, merciful, grace-giving God who, despite our traumatic events and circumstances, is there to walk beside us, carry us at times when we can't. And so sometimes, for us in classrooms, that looks like understanding that when a kiddo is really nervous and they are acting out because they don't know what's coming in the schedule or they don't understand the curriculum or something at home is preventing them from focusing on the lesson of Jesus walking on the water, that the way we minister to students, although the curriculum is amazing and wonderful and a priority, the way we minister to students is ultimately controlled by God. And that might be you in relationship and fellowship, sitting with a child, scratching one of the little fidgets, saying a prayer, right? It's understanding the root behind the behavior. It's the mindset shift we have as volunteers to say, the function, the why, the communication, all that stuff that frustrates me, that overwhelms me, that I'm trying to figure out how to manage in the classroom, ultimately is a kid crying out for help. It's a kid, whether neurodivergent or neurotypical or some traumatic event or who's just not having a great day, is in some way saying, I need you, and I need you to help me find God. And then we start to see and be reminded of the whole child rather than just the behavior and the sin, right? Because that child, even in the moments where they are engaging in behavior that is downright frustrating and disrespectful to the point that you're like, I don't know, I gotta take a break. I don't know if I can volunteer next week, right? Ultimately, even then, that child is made in the image of God, just like we are when we turn our backs on Jesus. And we have to model exactly what Jesus always provides to us, loving support. And specifically here, this is a really big deal because statistics as far back as 2017 shows that right here in DC, 47% of children and teens have experienced a traumatic event. That's almost half. Almost half of the children that reside in the district have experienced some form of a traumatic event due to the death or incarceration of a parent, witnessing or being a victim of violence, or living with someone who's been suicidal and has a drug or alcohol problem, according to federal data. Who are the kids we serve? Why are they engaging in the behavior that they engage in? And more importantly, how can we continue to see them focus past the problem? Help them get rooted in faith and develop a relationship that allows us, even in those most frustrating moments, to say, you are awesome. I love you. God loves you. And even in moments where you are being incredibly frustrating, or you can't focus, or you seem scared, this is the place we want you, because this place is the safe place. This is the safe haven and faith out of the world that is so very broken. The types of prompts we use, the tone of voice, the facial expressions, whether we're giving a lot of attention or a little attention, whether we have a sensory fidget or not, whether we're sitting next to them or they're sitting next to their peer, right? Our trauma-informed practices all come back to relationships. It's interactions that we have, big ones and small ones, prayer requests and follow-ups, emails to parents, high fives in the hallway, morning moments where you say, I'm so glad you came to Sunday school today, especially when it's the kid that you were the most frustrated by last week. It's loving our neighbors as ourselves, even when they're 5 or 6 or 10 and engaging in disruptive behavior in the classroom. And modeling and practicing and teaching forgiveness and mercy, that Jesus has it for us, and we can have it for them, and they can have it with each other. When Susie steals the paint crayon from Johnny, and Johnny's really upset about it because he wanted to finish coloring his nativity coloring sheet. It's getting to share with our kiddos that mindfulness and self-regulation can be and should be centered on Christ. It's inviting Him into our hearts and their hearts, and in those rough and tough moments when you're using the sensory fidget, incorporating prayer, because that's ministry. Maybe that's praying Psalm 23, right? Maybe that's teaching a child, it's okay to be anxious that mom's in church and you're with me for the first time. Let's pray Psalm 23 while we run our finger on a mindfulness map. God's with you. I'm with you. And it's okay if we don't get the whole lesson today. Because in that moment, you've shown that love of God, right? And then we can come back to the curriculum. But because you've done it, they're more likely to engage with the curriculum now, right? It's having a chance to help center a child's identity and confidence in the Lord. It's fellowship. It's walking alongside our children and reminding them that they're loved, that they are seen, and that they are chosen every day, every moment of their lives by us and by God. So what questions do you have that I can answer? I know that was a lot in a very condensed amount of time. Any questions? Yeah.
Sometimes during worship, when you ask, I teach second, third graders, you say, okay, we're gonna worship God, everybody stand up, and you have 2 or 3 children who don't stand up. And it's like you have just a limited amount of time, you don't want to put the spotlight on that, you wanna worship God. So, but at the same time, they're not following the direction. The adults have to stand up at church, and it's kind of a important thing to do. So how would you handle that?
I'm gonna say something that's probably gonna sound very backwards to a lot of people. I get this reaction a lot. Are they harming anybody by sitting down? If not, if they're still quiet, if they're not causing disruption other than just sitting, I probably wouldn't force them to stand, right? Because God can reach them if they're sitting. And yes, there is truth to the fact that there are moments where in church, right, we stand and sit and kneel. We're Anglican, we like to do it a lot, in fact, right? It's like people aerobics. Woo, okay, right? But does God stop loving you if you can't? Does God stop loving the 99-year-old that can't walk to the rail for communion at the chancel? No, right? It's okay to adapt things. It's okay to, quote, let it slide that they're sitting, because what you're demonstrating to them is, nope, that wasn't the direction. And maybe you still prompt, right, neutrally. Maybe your assistant still goes over and says, hey, we need to stand and sing, or you need to at least watch the worship video that's going on, or the leader, right? But in those moments, the best we can do is remember that the control is really God's, and God can reach them whether they're sitting or standing. And right now is my time to focus on the other 6 that are standing and worshiping, and maybe my assistant goes and sits or stands next to the ones that are not. And as they're worshiping, they start worshiping with them, even though they're sitting, and including and incorporating them in a different kind of way, right? Maybe it's the kiddo who just emotionally doesn't have the bandwidth to stand, right? Maybe it's a kiddo who hasn't been diagnosed with some form of motor disorder and their muscles are really tired. We don't know all the time, right? And so it's okay for things to not look like everybody perfectly following the direction, because we as adults certainly don't, right? That's human nature. Now, that does not mean that in moments where you have a kid that's like climbing on top of a desk or under a table when it's unsafe, that we're just going to let that slide, right? But pick and choose those moments of what's really the goal? What's the behavior that you want? Worship or standing? and then center them back on that.
Because I thought if I force that, then they're even gonna be more resistant to the worship, you know?
Entirely possible. And if it's attention, right? All of a sudden they have figured out, well, you know what, she doesn't pay attention to me unless I don't stand up. And then someone's like over here all the time telling me to stand up, right? And they might do that more often. And so sometimes the best thing you can do is keep them safe and model. Model what the appropriate response is and love them anyways, even when it doesn't look perfectly right the way that we wanted it to look. Adaptation and differentiation can be okay. Yeah.
So I have the 4th and 5th grade class, and my experience is that students collectively all like to interject with something, and I think it's great because it shows they're engaged in a moment. I don't want to, say that some is more important than other input. So what's like a good classroom strategy for sort of bringing that natural instinct to jump in with something into the because I think sometimes the material that we have doesn't really have that baked in, ready to go.
And you have 4th and 5th grade?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna give you a strategy that I didn't put in here, but it's very specific to that, and it's really super easy, and it's called the blurt book, okay? You give them a piece of paper and you tell them, okay guys, we're gonna read the Bible lesson, and then we're gonna talk about it, and I have some questions that you're gonna need to answer, right? However it is that it comes up in your curriculum. And I know you guys are gonna have amazing insights. God is putting so many things on your hearts and your brains that you're gonna wanna tell me and tell each other, and that's fantastic. I want you to do that. But first, before you say it out loud, I want you to write it down on your blurt book. I want you to put it on your paper, right? And then as they're doing that, you go through the pieces where they're not supposed to talk. And then you plug it back in. All right, let's go back to our paper. We're gonna do it one at a time. Remember, we have to raise our hand. Who's going first? And then you plug in time for them to be able to do it, right? When you create moments for that, then you filled the cup, right? They've already done it. They've gotten it out, that impulsive moment of like, but I might forget, right? I do the same thing. That's why I take notes, right? It's quite often why I interrupt in training, right? Because I'm like, but I just have, right? If they can get it out, and then you can plug it in a very specific way so that there's time for it, they're less likely to interrupt you in the moments where they shouldn't, right? You can also do things like set a timer, right? All right, we're gonna have 2 minutes where everybody can share. When the timer goes off, we gotta move on, okay? And remember, you can still share about God and the amazing things you thought of, even when we're not in the Sunday school classroom, right? Because that's really important too. They shouldn't only think that talking about God happens when they're at church, right? And so maybe that gives them the motivation to say, well, I'll just tell Susie this in the hallway when we're going to the sanctuary, right? Did I answer your question?
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Anything else? Yeah. Yeah.
I mainly have worked with 3 and 4-year-olds, so really little kids. And I have found, this is very general, but the girls love to come and sit by me and answer every question and be very participatory. The boys are wanting to run around, and I find myself getting resentful sometimes, a little, including my own son, because they're
It's a lot.
paying attention.
Yeah.
And like, I've wondered like how best to think about the boys' inclusion, and like, are we disturbing them by having the circle time and trying to tell stories when they just end up doing what's not what we're wanting them to do, and like, how can I think about best what they're getting from the classroom time?
Yeah, I totally get it. And with 3 and 4-year-olds, it can be a little tough, right? Because developmentally, their cognition is in a little bit of a different place, and we're trying to teach expectations, but then can they really follow expectations, right? I don't think you're doing a disservice by having circle time, by any means, right? What I do think is that there's a balancing act of, right, if the girls are all right up front, right, even if the boys are kind of on the fringe, right, like, you can do this thing where you ask a question and then you answer it, okay? You can pretend you're Dora, right? You can say, Heather, I know that you were listening to our Bible study. Don't you just think that it's amazing that Jesus walked on water? That's amazing, right? You've given them the answer, right? They're answering. They don't have to think about it, even if they're still right here. But they're incorporated. They've just gotten a little bit of attention. That might now be a motivating factor for them to be like, oh, okay, I'm gonna come a little closer, right? Now, I don't necessarily think that it would be wise to let them just like run wild in the back, right? That could be, from a safety perspective, dangerous. Now, you may have 1 or 2 that do need to wander, right? I don't like to sit or stand behind the podium while I talk. I've walked this whole time, and that be frustrating for people, so if it is, I'm very sorry, but I'm a very boisterous talk with my hands kind of a person. Some of our kids are like that too, right? Sometimes they process cognitively better when there's movement, but what you might find is that you're able to direct this big movement to other sensory movement, right? That this is enough where you can say, hey, this thing has a little marble in it, but you can't get out and swallow. Don't we love that we were cognizant of choking hazards? Thank you to your team that ordered these. You can sit right here and you can just fidget and get all your fidgets out if you need to, right? You can do things like fill the jar for every time that somebody answers a question. And when the jar gets filled up, we get to just do a movement break. Woo! Or we're listening to our favorite worship song, right? Your team has bought really fun reinforcement that you can use. They're magnetic. They just stick on the stars, right? So it can be catch 'em being good, right? And you can then use the girls that are really engaged to motivate the boys. Wow, oh my goodness, we have all these stars that the girls have done. Hey, Johnny, just tell me really quick, what was your favorite part of the Bible story, right? Quick, oh, I love that you answered that for me. Great, right? And plug them in, because the more that you can do that and they're getting reinforcement for being engaged, even if it doesn't look perfectly right, the more likely they are to try to be more engaged in the future. Does that answer that question? Anything? Yeah.
That's helpful for me too, because I'm working with the smaller, like K and first grade.
Okay.
Little ones. And I'm just wondering, I like, with your hierarchy, are we supposed to, like these, promptings, you start here and go up? Like, or how does this work for how we use this?
So clinically, the prompt hierarchy, there it is. The prompt hierarchy clinically works like this. When you're teaching new skills, we typically start down here and go most to least, right? Because you're not going to throw a kid into the deep end of your pool without water wings. You're going to hold on, right? You're not going to hand a pencil to a 3-year-old and expect them to write their name. They've never held it. I'm probably going to do hand over hand and help hold the pencil, right? We might be doing a craft. They might need more full physical support, right? This is not just necessarily like grabbing them and moving them or whatever, right? But typically when you start with new skills, you start down here, and as they get more independent with the skill, you'll work your way up, right? For us in Sunday school, that might look a little different because we typically don't do a lot of physical prompting for safety reasons, right? And protection of boundaries. But you do some partial physical prompting. We see this very often, right? Do you mind if I touch your elbow? Right, it's this thing, right? It's the, all right, come on, we gotta go to Sunday school, right? And I've just tapped the elbow. That's a partial physical prompt, right? That helps to guide and motivate, right? So when we notice that there's a brand new skill, so especially with those really young ones, 3, 4, that maybe haven't done these types of things before, we typically start down here rather than just give a direction and expect that they're going to be able to follow it, like they know what to do. When it's behavioral, when we know they know how to do the skill, at least relatively well, but we're redirecting, things haven't gone well, right? We don't want to get more invasive, more intrusive than we have to. In that sense, we go least to most, right? So I might repeat myself with a verbal prompt before I model how to do it, or before I go over and touch the elbow to come from the coloring worksheet back to circle time. That's the gist, but basically, for your indications, the reason I put it in here is to give you guys kind of a mindset around there are other ways to prompt other than just verbally repeating yourself 900 times, right? Because it can be very frustrating. As the volunteer, you're like, I have said 6 million times to come to circle and nobody's doing it, right? You can point on the visual schedule. Hey guys, we're coming to circle, remember? You can use the peer that's done it as the model, or if you have that 6th grader that's coming in as your youth support, like, hey guys, look, Mr. John's come over here and sat down. I want everybody to come sit with him, right? Now there's attention focused on that youth volunteer. That usually works very well. You can model it. You can come and sit and show them what that looks like or where they're supposed to be. And you can intersperse those things so you don't have to feel like to yourself you've repeated and repeated and repeated, and then you're burned out and frustrated and tired. And oftentimes what you'll see is that it's kind of like when you're watching TV and there's all these really loud ads that you've tuned out because you're like, I just want to get back to the football game or the show that I'm watching, and all of a sudden there's one that's like silent. And what do we all do? We're like, did the TV stop working? Right? And we look at the TV, right? Changing the prompting style is very similar, right? Sometimes they just are so used to hearing us talk and talk and talk and talk and off, and then all of a sudden, something isn't just verbal, and they're like, wait, what? Oh, circle. Okay. Or everybody else is over here, right? Sometimes it is kind of that shock to the system that can do that and help redirect so that you don't have to feel like you're doing all of the repetition all the time.